Good day, everybody. I'm just checking to ensure that we are accessible on X. We are indeed. Now I'll just quickly check YouTube. And we are live there as well. So let's get this show on the road. First of all, I'd like to say hello to those who've already joined us. Bad Wolf says hello to me and Laith. How you doing, Bad Wolf? We have greetings from California, from Warsaw on Fire, ode to John Trudell, which is peace to all. Here to that. Magda MK Kalimera, bon dia, good day. Welcome, thank you. And others are joining as I speak. So with that, with no further ado, let me first of all welcome our comrade and frequent guest on Reason to Resist, Laith Marouf. Laith, as many of you will know, is a distinguished geopolitical analyst who always brings a fascinating and original perspective to the complex issues we talk about on our respective programs. He's also, of course, the executive director of Free Palestine TV. And before we sign off, we'll just have a brief chat about Free Palestine TV, which so richly deserves our support. He is based in Beirut, Lebanon, where he is currently situated. So Laith, welcome back to Reason to Resist.
Thank you for having me, Dimitri. It's been a while. Thank you. It's good to see you.
It has indeed been a while. So much has happened since we last spoke. And just let me say before we get into it that we will not, unfortunately, be joined by Rami Yahya today. Rami has other commitments. Journalism is not the only thing that Rami does. He has more conventional employment, so that obviously preoccupies him much of the time. Now, today is a national holiday in Canada known as Canada Day. And this holiday was established to celebrate the anniversary of Canadian Confederation, which occurred on July 1st, 1867. Now, Laith, before moving to Beirut a few years ago, you worked for many years as a broadcasting law consultant in Canada. And in that capacity, you worked extensively with Indigenous groups in what is now called Canada. And based on your time in Canada, your work with Indigenous groups, and your own experiences as a man of Palestinian and Syrian origin, how do you view this so-called Canada Day?
First off, obviously, let's all agree there is no such thing as Canada or Canadian. There is Anglo-settler colonial society, a French settler colonial society, and the indigenous nations that are there. And this fallacy of July 1st being a day of confederacy, when up until now, the French colonists refused to sign the Constitution, and more importantly, the indigenous nations and the Cree Federation, the largest indigenous nation in Canada, refused to sign on that. So there's no such thing as Canada. Canada is an apartheid state. I would take this moment to commemorate July 10th and the standoff at Ganasatage, and what the colonists would like to call the Oka crisis, when the indigenous nations, what people would call Mohawks around Montreal, rose up to defend the graveyard of their ancestors from being turned into a parking lot for a golf course. That the governments municipal and provincial and federal, were refusing to stop the desecration of these graves. I say this because this is what Canada is, and if our Canadian, quote unquote Canadian, listeners don't remember how the government sent the military on our indigenous brothers and sisters in that crisis and almost killed women and children, as well as the last time that there was an armed struggle between the indigenous nations and the apartheid colony of Canada in 1995 in the Chipatan Lake standoff, where 7 indigenous warriors faced off with 7,000 Canadian troops, 1995, and faced off with 77,000 rounds of munitions, 24 hours standoff with helicopters and APCs and landmines and assassination attempts on indigenous nations. This is what Canada is, quote unquote, which I am a citizen of, and you are a citizen of too. And and it's important, so on this day, to remember, why is Canada right now supporting the genocide of Palestinian peoples, indigenous peoples? It's because that's in the DNA of the colony of Canada. Israel wishes it can achieve what Canada achieved in genociding without anybody objecting a mass number of indigenous nations and looting their land, and then coming out as the most liberal nation in the West. This is the propaganda that Canada achieved. Israel dreams that it can achieve that achievement of the Canadian colonial state, to get people to forget that there is a living indigenous resistance and indigenous nations that actually occupy the vast majority of the territory of this land. Us as immigrants and those who are part of the colonist European creed, most of us live 50 kilometers away from the border of the United States, 90-something% of us. The rest of Canada is indigenous till today. We should celebrate today the possible future of their liberation.
I just want our audience to know that Laith had no idea I was going to ask him that question.
No.
What I told Laith was we were going to talk about the resistance.
You triggered something. I lived with many indigenous nations. It's not about my media work. Prior to that, I lived with many indigenous nations, months and years at a time. And all my time working on Palestine while I was in apartheid Canada. Right. I made it. I understood my responsibility as somebody who was trying to advocate for Palestinian rights in an apartheid state called Canada. I understood my responsibility not to make that at the expense of indigenous nations, and in fact, so I wouldn't compromise with any liberal anti-indigenous just so they can get to pro-Palestinian on me, or conservatives to get pro-Palestinian on me. And I understood that I am a guest on an indigenous land that I have not received welcome on by chance. Mm-hmm. And therefore, I have a duty as much as to Palestine, to indigenous nations, and I spent half of my time, all of my advocacy, half of it, when I was inside the colony of Canada, I spent it on working on the direct front lines with indigenous nations as much as I was working on Palestine.
Just to throw in my 2 cents about this issue, my parents came to Canada in their late teens from Greece, the land to which I am indigenous, and They came because Greece was in a disastrous condition after the brutal Nazi occupation, and then the civil war that erupted at the with provocation from the British between the communist resistance and a motley crew of monarchists and Nazi collaborators and right-wing ideologues. So out of that devastation, they were afforded the opportunity to come to Canada on a boat for free because Canada was looking for cheap labor. My parents didn't even have a high school education, not even a year of high school education when they came, didn't speak a word of English or French, and came only out of economic necessity and told me they didn't want to leave their country. And I'm sure that when they came, they had no idea because they had so little education about what Canada had done to the indigenous peoples of this land. When I came here, people from Southern Europe, and I remember this quite distinctly about my own upbringing, experienced a significant amount of bigotry. It was nothing like, the bigotry that has, right up until this very day, been inflicted upon indigenous peoples. But we got a bit of the taste of white supremacy ourselves. The Europeans of the North looked down on us back in those days. Over time, we became fully integrated in Canadian society. And today, I don't think any Greeks, Italians, Portuguese really experience meaningful discrimination. Like that, then back then, it wasn't a friendly place, and I've never forgotten that. More recently, Laith, that's a distant memory for me, even though I do remember it vividly. What I'm more concerned about is that this country, which, as you say, presents itself as a model of democratic progressivism and anti-racist, sentiment and so forth, is really nothing more than an apartheid state at the end of the day. And I'm shamed. Just be blunt. I'm going to come out and say it. I'm ashamed to be Canadian more and more as I watch this genocide unfold. Having said that, I know there are millions of wonderful people in this country, conscientious Canadians. Laith is one of them. There are many people out there like Laith, but the people who are in charge and those who support them, which do constitute a significant swath of the Canadian public, I frankly don't identify with them at all. So on this Canada Day, as this country foments, enables, perpetrates genocide and a host of other crimes both here and abroad, I will not be celebrating the Confederation Day in 1867. I suspect the same is true of you, Laith.
Yeah, I mean, it's ridiculous to me, and that would be like an indigenous person celebrating Israel Day. You see, it's just it's also, when I'm talking now, I'm not only directing this speech to regular Joe Blow Canadian, immigrant communities from Africa, Latin America, and Asia, that includes Arabs, although we are always kind of outside this idea of what's an Asian and what's an African. They have a responsibility. You can see how they line up the streets with all these new immigrants waving flags, Canada, on the parades, and or give all that space in the media to fabricate this idea of multiculturalism, which doesn't exist. And I want to be clear that there is no such thing as a white person. Okay. White is a fabricated, malleable identity that is totally dependent on colonialism. There's Anglo and Germanic and Latin, and it keeps on growing, accepting who accepts the colonial contract, which is, as a citizen, to be looting the lands of indigenous people and killing them. That's the social contract in Canada, that's the social contract in Israel, that's the social contract in Australia between the colonist and the state. And whiteness is malleable as much as it is. You have Black people like Obama, and that's another context of Black doesn't exist. There's no such thing as Black. There's Bantu peoples, there's Zulu peoples, there's Ethiopic people, there's Somalis. These are, identities based on language. And all black and white was made in the furnace of the colonial project in North America, as much as the redness. You see, the furnace of colonial genocide that created those identities which they don't exist in reality. So we have to make sure that anyone that listens here, that hears the word white and takes it as an attack on them, they need to question themselves. Are they white, really? There is no such thing as white. What culture are you in? By the way, I am also Anglo, like you, because we think and live in an Anglo society. I consume Anglo culture and pop culture and read literature in English. I speak it and dream it. Therefore, I am Anglo as much as I'm Arabic. And so people need to break these colonial identities that facilitate the creation of monocultures that are enforced on us, whether it's indigenous or African diaspora or European diaspora. Look at that, how you're being molded into this identity.
Thank you for those thoughts, Laith. We could talk for hours about this. You and I actually have, as we toured the devastation of South Lebanon over the past 18 months. But today we're going to move on because we want to focus on the momentous developments in Laith's part of the world. So with that, I'd like to turn to the subject of the state of the resistance in West Asia. And today I'm going to ask you, Laith, about three areas in particular. First, occupied Palestine, then Lebanon, and then finally we'll discuss Iran. So let us begin with the state of affairs in occupied Palestine, and in particular Gaza. A few days ago, the Israeli military announced the death of the 20th Israeli terrorist. They call them soldiers. I think a much more accurate term is terrorists, who was killed in Gaza during the month of June. And this prompted the Israeli liberal newspaper Haaretz to publish a chart showing the deaths sustained by the Israeli genocide forces on a monthly basis over the prior 12 months. Now, let's be clear here that these are the official statistics, right? So who knows what the actual casualty figures are? They're certainly not going to be smaller than this, and may well be far in excess of this. And secondly, this is only deaths, not wounded. So you will see there, Laith, I don't know if you've already seen this chart, but June was indeed the highest level of deaths sustained by Israel's genocide forces in the past 12 months. And there was obviously a dramatic decrease during the months of February and March because of the ceasefire, which Israel did not respect, but certainly it drastically reduced the level of killing, and the resistance abided by the ceasefire when Trump returned to the White House on January 20th and did not attack Israeli forces, even though frequently Palestinians were being attacked. So that explains this dramatic reduction in the deaths sustained by the Israeli military in February and March. But then there was a rapid increase. The second thing I want to show you is one of the incidents that occurred during the month of June in Gaza, and one of the worst for Israel's genocide forces, was an attack by resistance fighters on an armored personnel carrier in Gaza. I would show you the video, but YouTube doesn't like that sort of thing. If you see the video, and you can find it on resistance channels, including on Telegram, it is extraordinary. The courage that these fighters require to do this sort of thing is really just beyond my comprehension. But somebody, one of them walked up to an armored personnel carrier, dropped an explosive device in it, and a massive fire broke out, and it killed 7 troops inside. And this has caused a considerable amount of angst in Israel, not just to the military, but to the media, because frankly, it showed a quite astonishing lack of military professionalism on the part of the genocide forces, in my opinion. So in any case, with that as background, Laith, what do you make of this? I mean, we're now into almost the 21st month of this genocide. And this military is armed to the teeth, backed by, in every conceivable way, by a military alliance, not just the United States, but a NATO military alliance that expends probably in the range of $2 trillion a year on its military. And rather than, the statistics indicating success, it seems, based on the trend over the last several months, that things are getting worse for Israel's military. What is your take on what is happening there?
Yeah, I mean, these are the declared numbers, so obviously we take them with a grain of salt. They're much lower than the real true numbers. And I would say I know you described it as unprofessionalism of the IDF, but I would say it's the ingenuity of the fighters, that the IDF can try to do whatever it wants to. The necessity is the mother of ingenuity, and a people that are under a Holocaust condition will find ways to resist that their oppressor cannot even imagine. And that's what we do. And that's why the Palestinians, although with all these huge civilian losses that are mostly because of shelling from the air and the ground and the ships from far away, in reality, if we look at the face-to-face between the Zionist occupation soldiers and the resistance fighters, we see on the one side the diaper women's lingerie army, and on the other, people that want to defend their land and their people and their loved ones and to get their freedom. This is the difference between the two. Most of these soldiers that are dying, have never had to fight something like this. They like to fire, as we see, from far away, even in terms of if it's small weapons, that's going to be a sniper, as the snipers that are shooting on the Palestinians returning, going to the aid queues in Gaza. So the ground operations for the Zionist military have always been its weakest, because they are so dependent on the cutting edge technologies that are handed to them by daddy in the White House and daddy in London, that they can fire from far away. It's all about like video game situations. They'll continue to lose this ground invasion war, and they'll continue to genocide more Palestinians until they're defeated. And that's what's coming. And we could see why now it makes sense, actually, that the axis of resistance didn't go attack all on the same day, October 8th. We can see now the actual plan fruiting in front of us.
Yes. On the question of, fighting for one's land, I just want to note that the 20th soldier slain, again, soldier, I use the term loosely, a much more accurate term would be Israeli terrorist, slain in Gaza in the month of June, according to the Times of Israel, was Sergeant Yisrael Natan Rosenfeld of the 601st Combat Engineering Battalion. He moved to Israel from London in the United Kingdom with his family 11 years ago, so when he was 9 years old, and is not indigenous to the land of Palestine. Now, I'd like to switch, Laith, over to the occupied West Bank. Now, within the past few days, the media committee of Jenin, the Jenin refugee camp, reported that the occupation forces had been carrying out continuous military aggression on Jenin city and its refugee camp for 159 days, beginning on January 21st, 2025. The aggression included home demolitions, property destruction, forced displacement, and the conversion of homes into military outposts. As of June 28th, so less than 6 months, the occupation forces had killed 42 Palestinians in Jenin, and that actually included, I should say, 2 by the Palestinian Authority. They were killed by the Palestinian Authority, and dozens more were injured and arrested. Over 600 homes during that period were completely destroyed. Nearly 22,000 residents forcibly displaced and still barred from returning. Laith, Free Palestine TV has journalists on the ground in the West Bank who've been reporting under extraordinarily difficult circumstances. What are they telling you nowadays about conditions there, not just within Jenin, but throughout the occupied West Bank?
So the situation that you described in Jenin is repeated in Tulkarem and its refugee camp, and Nablus and its refugee camp. And so there's ongoing destruction. I think in the Tulkarem refugee camp is almost now 60% of structures destroyed. So it's starting to resemble images of South Lebanon, those camps and the neighborhoods in the cities that are adjacent to them. And this is above and beyond the daily attacks by Israeli settlers, Jewish white supremacists, attacking villages. And then, as happened in Taiba, which is the only village in the West Bank that's totally Christian in terms of inhabitants, they were attacked, their homes were set on fire with the families inside, and when they came out and tried to put out their fires, they were attacked by the settlers, and then they fought back, and then the Israeli military comes and shoots 3 indigenous people from Taiba, killing them, 3 Palestinians. And that's repeating and more often even in the Jordan Valley, which is very isolated from the rest of the West Bank. You need like total security clearance to even cross to these villages that have been practically depopulated. And we saw, repetitions of attacks like this all across the West Bank. And one last thing I would say is that Mahmoud Abbas and the treacherous, treasonous, collaborationist Vichy of our modern world, he has cut all salaries and subsidies from the Palestinian Authority for the families of martyrs. And so today there was demonstrations outside the Prime Minister's office, whatever that is, and the families got beaten up. Families were, these are orphans and widows, and this is how the Palestinian Authority is collaborating. A part of the ways it's collaborating is also, of course, identifying all the people that the Israelis end up killing if they don't arrest them first and kill them themselves. The Palestinian Authority has, I think, killed up to 20 somewhat people since the beginning of Al-Aqsa flood in the West Bank.
Treacherous indeed. So let's turn now to Lebanon, and then we're going to spend the rest of our time after Lebanon discussing Iran. In May of this year, this received virtually no attention in the Western media, Laith. There were municipal elections in Lebanon, and Al Jazeera, which I think you can fairly describe as hostile to the resistance, including, of course, Hezbollah, reported that Hezbollah had held firm. Those were the words they used in Lebanon's municipal elections. And I'm curious to know what your perspective is on those elections, Laith. Do you think that's a fair way to describe them, that Hezbollah held firm?
Basically, Hezbollah and the coalition that it ran on, because it doesn't run as Hezbollah in the elections, not only held on to what they had before, but added more municipalities because they had a wider coalition. So, it's not a big change, but it shows you that the Western-backed collaborationist class in Lebanon that banked on the mass destruction of the country and the punishment of its civilian population and the mass killing of civilians and journalists and medical staff in the country would lead to the population bowing down and choosing to basically accept humiliation and subjugation and vassalhood to the West, that didn't actually lead to nothing. It became a nothing burger. And this is why we are starting to see, I don't know if you saw those leaks today about the supposed deal between al-Julani, the ISIS president of Syria, with the Zionist colony, supposedly, that he will be guaranteeing, undermining Hezbollah and Iran, and this will be like an alliance between the Wahhabi death squads, basically, and the Zionist death squads. And you see, now they're coming out publicly with it because they were hoping that they can do this change through the punishment of the civilian population, the deliberate terrorization of the Lebanese population, that they were hoping that will break the Lebanese regular Joe Blow, their will, and they will vote against Hezbollah and they can get into power without a direct fight. Now it seems like that the West is driving towards having the Wahhabi death squads attack. And by the way, there was today multiple Israeli attacks in South Lebanon, as happened the day before and the day before and the day before, every day. Okay, and there was a huge group of ISIS, al-Nusra Front, al-Julani related terrorists that were Syrian nationals that were caught in the Dahiya today, earlier, with explosives and plans to attack the Ashura procession. Ashura is the 10 days mourning the death of Hussein, the grandson of Prophet Muhammad, that will happen all around the Shia communities. So we could see already the plans becoming active of using the Wahhabis that are now on two sides of Lebanon, in the north and the east, with the Zionists in the south and the UNIFIL in their boats in the sea. This is what Lebanon is, that they think that they can corner Hezbollah into a new war. Everybody is expecting this war, as well as everybody's expecting a return to Iran's war. And this is why Hezbollah has been not responding militarily yet. It's fast as it can, preparing for the upcoming confrontation that is inevitable.
So that's a good segue into the next question I had for you. This is a report from the Times of Israel yesterday. There's been talk of Lebanon and Israel normalizing, even as Israel illegally occupies parts of Lebanon, small parts of Lebanon, but nonetheless small parts and strategic parts of the country, and continues to treat the ceasefire agreement between Israel and Lebanon as toilet paper. Actually, that's an insult to toilet paper. It's much worse than that. This ceasefire, for all intents and purposes, means nothing to Israel, and it's proven that in spades since it was entered into. In any event, the genocidal entity...
It's proving itself to be the word of a Zionist. That's what it is.
Correct. Absolutely. So the genocidal entity is saying it's not the first time, as reported here by the Times of Israel, that Hezbollah must be disarmed before Israel-Lebanon normalization can advance. So they won't even talk about normalizing, which basically means betrayal, capitulation, until Hezbollah is disarmed. Now, I want to ask you about the prospects of that happening based upon what you're seeing and hearing at the moment. But before I do that, I have another question for you. Michel Aoun, this former general, returned to the presidency of Lebanon earlier this year. I asked you about the elections that happened. I don't think a lot of people understand exactly how Aoun, who appears to be palatable to the genocidal entity and its Western backers, how he came to occupy the position of the presidency again. So my question to you is this, Laith. What do you say about the democratic legitimacy of Aoun as compared to that of Hezbollah, especially after these municipal elections?
Well, look, the headline there is very telling. They're telling you exactly what they're saying. You're going to sign on to the Abrahamic Accord, but that can't happen without us disarming Hezbollah because they'll be in the way. You see, it's not. It's so hilarious that they're trying to warp the same words that I'm telling you, but in a different. So it's telling, and it's also wishful thinking, because everybody just watched what happened to the Shia, the Alawis, the Christians, and the Druze, and the moderate Sunnis, which are the majority in Syria, and I'm talking about the religious organizations and preachers. What happened to them in Syria with the takeover of the Wahhabi death squads. So anyone that thinks that not every house in Lebanon has now bought its personal arsenal, okay, forget Hezbollah rearming. I'm talking about every Shia, every Christian, every Druze in the country is buying as much weapons to put in their house as possible. Nobody will ever allow what happened in Syria to happen in Lebanon. Just last week on Sunday Mass, Orthodox Church in Damascus blown up with 26 Syrian Christians slaughtered while they're praying.
And that was an extremely important and old church in the history of Christianity, was it not? I think, didn't you and I visit that church in Damascus in 2023 before the genocide began?
It's not the same church, but it is an important stop on the pilgrimage route between Ma'lula and the old city of Damascus. And so it was targeted, and I'm watching every day the videos, as the people here in Lebanon are, of the mass killings and the mass expulsions from whole villages in the Hama and Homs area every day. There's one village just yesterday in the Hama area, 64 people killed, more than half of them women and children. And you wake up the next day, the whole village is empty, and now colonists that are from Central Asia with their whole families and new passports given to them by Ajulani as Syrians suddenly become citizens, take over the whole village. This is happening on a daily basis. And, a lot of the Syrian Shias and Alawis and Christians have already crossed into Lebanon, legally or illegally. The country already had 2 million Syrians before the collapse of the Assad government. I'm sure there's another 2 million right now that are Shia Alawi and Christian that crossed into Lebanon. And many of the Sunnis, not all of them, just maybe 25% left, that were already happy with this, what we just saw. So it's there's no way Hezbollah is going to be disarmed, and Hezbollah is fast rearming, and with different strategies and different tactics for the war that's coming. That's going to be different than what we saw before. It's a total different war what we're going to see now.
So let's now turn to Iran. Predictably, Netanyahu's genocidal regime and the Israeli media are crowing about Israel's supposed historic victory in the 12-day war. Yet there's no credible evidence, in my opinion, that Iran's ability to enrich uranium has been eliminated, or that its stock of 60% enriched uranium was destroyed. And clearly, Israel failed to effect regime change in Iran, even though that has been its obvious, ardent objective for decades. And on top of all of that, Israel itself suffered unprecedented damage in the face of these attacks. This is an article, a headline from Le Monde, a Western-oriented newspaper based in France. Israel under fire from Iranian missiles comes to a standstill, and you have an image there of the destruction, or a little tiny bit of it. What I know from admissions by the Israeli media, and I think we can all assume is the bare minimum of what happened, is that the Iranian missiles took out the oil refinery in Haifa. Israel only has 2 of them, and the oil refinery in Haifa has double the capacity of the other oil refinery, which is in Ashdod. Israel took out the Weizmann Institute, or at least did severe damage to it. This is the technological backbone of the IDF, the genocide forces of Israel. They struck the Mossad facilities. They struck the Ministry of Defense. Those are things that come immediately to mind, but I know I missed it. I think they struck port facilities. They struck an area that was adjacent to a military hospital that had important intelligence assets. So this is what we know. And of course, there was an oppressive regime of military censorship that was in place. And you can say, look, that's fine. People do that in war. They didn't want to give the information and the enemy information about what was being hit and how extensive the damage was. Whether that's true or not, the fact remains that we don't have anywhere close to a complete picture of the extent of damage that was done by the Iranian missile attacks. So since the so-called ceasefire went into effect, Laith, have we gained more insight into the damage that Israel sustained? I mentioned the major sort of devastation of which I'm aware, but has anything else come to light to your knowledge about the extent of the damage?
Well, I mean, there's even the BBC reporting, and they were live, and the guy was talking about the total destruction of the downtown Tel Aviv, and then talking about the things that they are not allowed to go film, all the military sites. So we know from the time of those missiles falling, people reporting them in which region they're falling, even if there's no images, we can clearly ascertain that the major air bases and the major defensive lines of the Zionist colony in the Golan Heights, in North Palestine, in South Palestine have been hit extensively, more than the civil areas that are, populated housing areas, like let's say Tel Aviv or whatever, metropolitan areas. So, maybe around 30% of the missiles that Iran fired during the war were directed to the cities of Tel Aviv and Haifa, but the rest was on the Golan Heights, in North Palestine, in South Palestine, places that are all military. We know that they also hit around the Dimona reactor. They didn't hit the reactor itself, and that was probably on purpose to just show to the Israelis that they can also destroy nuclear reactors and lead to a nuclear fallout if the Americans and the Israelis cross that line. Yes, the headquarters of practically all the intelligence services. And I want everybody to understand that during the first Gulf War in the year 1991, Saddam Hussein fired maybe, I don't know, 12 or somewhat Scud missiles on the Zionist colony. And for decades, we were told 0 casualties. Saddam's Scuds were all useless. The Great Patriot missiles took them down. And now we know that the 92 Israelis died from those few missiles that Saddam Hussein sent. So with the clear evidence that we have from the destruction and the images of the effects of Iran's hypersonic missiles and ballistic missiles, we must be presuming that there's a huge amount of destruction and loss for life for the Zionist colonists. And they admitted themselves that it cost them more than $2 billion on anti-air defense missiles alone, this 12-day war. So add to it the mass destruction and the destruction of the whole Silicon Valley of the Zionist colony, the destruction of the major factories in the Haifa Bay area and the around Tel Aviv. This is going to be in the tens of billions of dollars, if not hundreds of billions of dollars in damage.
Yeah, and just in terms of the damage that happened to Tel Aviv and Haifa, I thought that this revelation was particularly enlightening. Haaretz this week published an article which had an interesting admission. If you look at the very bottom, they're highlighted in pink. In Israel, many bases are in the heart of population centers. This is military installations they're talking about. This is an Israeli newspaper. With the prime example being the Kiryat, the IDF's headquarters in Tel Aviv. So they stuck that thing right in the heart of the most populous city in the genocidal entity. And, Laith, when I was in Iran recently, I had the opportunity to go to the National Aerospace Park, which displays a lot of the missiles in the Iranian arsenal. And we were given a tour by a brigadier general of the Revolutionary Guard. And just standing beside these things, there was a report I did from the Aerospace Museum. You can see these things are enormous. They carry these massive warheads. They're conventional explosives, but they're massive warheads. And as you mentioned, they are traveling at hypersonic speeds. What Israel fires typically are much less destructive missiles and bombs from airplanes that can't, for example, carry like the 30,000-pound bunker buster bombs that the U.S. claims to have dropped on Iran's nuclear facilities. And the reason why Israel is able to cause so much destruction is because of the accumulation, the sheer quantity of munitions they're dropping on places like Gaza and South Lebanon. But one of these missiles, because of the kinetic energy of a hypersonic missile and the size of its warhead, can basically wipe out an entire block, just one alone, whereas the Israeli munitions cannot do that. So this is something I think it's fair to say, Laith, I think you'll agree with me, that it's unprecedented in the experience of the Zionist colony and is likely to have a permanent impact on the psyche of Israelis. Do you think that's a fair observation?
Yes. And, the Israelis have, I want to say this to get it out of the way because this thought came to my head. The Israelis have around 270 aircraft that are used to bombard the nations around the area. And that's not enough, of course, to conduct all these wars that they're conducting. Clearly, the NATO is involved in it with their jets with no transponders doing whatever they want to. There is a big weakness for this. And I'm just talking right now to our audience in the West, that the audience in the West can do something about. These jets, the F-35s, need to be put in mechanic for checkup every sortie. And if there's one piece missing, they need to replace it. If that piece doesn't come, it cannot fly. And the F-15s, 16s, and 18, they can do 2 sorties before they have to be grounded for mechanic checkup. And you don't need to, you need to look at what Palestine Action is doing in the UK and target now the chain of delivery even for one kind of piece in one of these jets. One manufacturer that you take out of the chain will ground this whole fleet within a week because they wouldn't be able to replace that piece. And that's a power that everybody listening has that's in the West. Look at the production chain for parts for these jets. Your question was, I'm sorry, I just had this thought in my head.
Whether you believe this is going to have a permanent or long-lasting impact on the psyche of the Israeli population and how that might impact the future of the colony going forward.
I mean, what just happened to the Zionists, the whooping they got from Iran, and the fact that the emperor came and used the largest weapons, supposedly, this is what he claims, the largest weapons at the disposal of the American empire below the nuclear threshold. They used those on Iran, and they couldn't use any of their bases in the area. They had to fly from across the planet with those B-2s in fear of their mass death of their own soldiers in retaliation by Iran. And they failed. So what does this say? That meant the emperor, barked, and then just farted. Okay. Mm-hmm. That's what happened. The emperor just farted, and the whole world psyche was changed that day. The fact that Iran whipped the Zionists behind and then fought back the United States and now exposed the United States as unable to conduct a war with Iran without the use of nuclear weapons. We saw the joy spread around the world. Humanity now can see a way out, a possibility to defeat the Zionists, that there is hope, and we see more emboldened voices around the globe coming out, like Bob Villan, and we can talk about that. And inside the Zionist colony and inside the Zionist communities in Canada, the US, the UK, that, this defeat and the inability to shield themselves by the use of imperial force, to shield themselves from this, just punishment that they got. Okay, you could see now the anger and how they're going into a frenzy of really wanting to expose themselves even more. Going berserk, like calling death to the IDF as a call to death against Jewish children. You saw that headline? Artist calls for the death of Jewish children, and you're like, what is happening here? How did you get from IDF to Jewish children? But this is how crazed they are because of this whipping that they received.
Yeah, let me just say straight up, calling for the death of IDF soldiers is no different than calling for the death of the SS in the Second World War, in my opinion. Not a damn difference. Would we have been offended if we were alive during the Second World War, witnessing the monstrosities that the Nazis inflicted on the Jewish people, would we have been offended if people had called for death to the SS? Give me a break.
You know what's even worse than that? I mean, goddamn, this is the culture, the English, of punk music. You know, you had the Dead Kennedys, the Sex Pistols, what was this called, the Misfits, and you had songs calling for the death of Margaret Thatcher and happy for her death and dancing on it and the Queen and everything, and everybody's fine with all of that. You can have a song for not only a chant, a whole song for the death of anybody you want, and any religion, and any god, and any leader, and anything you want. But don't you dare touch the Zionist colony or its death cult or its death squads. This is the holy of holies. This is the golden calf, right? Mm-hmm. So it's crazy how English media is trying to force the English people, who are very rude usually publicly. They're fine with being rudeness, and it's fine, forcing them to act as if they're all Jewish themselves, or Zionist themselves, or Israeli themselves, or they are members of the IDF. They have to, as British citizens, they have to be invested in the IDF and the well-being of the IDF, or they're not British.
Yeah. I just want to point out that one of our audience members, Vina Khalek, noted that Trump was tweeting in support of the death of the Ayatollah Khamenei during this war. And that's not, some musician who doesn't have the ability to impact, the fate of any Israeli terrorist, i.e. soldier. No, this was somebody who actually has the capacity, the destructive capacity to bring about the death of this person, who is the civilian leader of a sovereign nation and who is widely respected in much of the Muslim world. So that didn't seem to offend all these people who are freaking out about a musician calling, for the death of the modern day equivalent of the SS. Just the hypocrisy is mind-boggling. I want to go back to something else you said, Laith, about, Palestine Action and what they're doing. The extraordinary work that they're doing to stop the flow of weapons to Israel, in particular in regard to the F-35. Since we started this whole project or discussion by talking about Canada Day, I want to point out to our fellow Canadians that there's a company in Ottawa called Gas Tops, the nation's capital, which provides essential parts for the F-35. I did a brief report there from the offices of that company, the facilities of that company last year. There was a protest organized there. There has not been, however, a systematic attempt to shut that company down. Now, if you want to make Canada great, if you want to, ensure that this country lives up to the billing of being a wonderful democracy and a defender of human rights, there's a great way you can do it, especially if you live in the Ottawa area. Go there and make a human chain and block access with your body to that facility and stop the flow of these essential parts to the death machines called F-35s. And there are many other ways which we in Canada can fulfill, bring the rhetoric to reality, but we're going to have to be willing to take significant risks with our own freedom and certainly with our reputations because of the smears that will inevitably come if we're going to do that. So I hope if you're listening, you're from the Ottawa area, please do what you can to stop this company from continuing to provide essential parts to those death machines. So let's continue on the subject of Iran, Laith.
That the death threat from Trump to the Ayatollah Khamenei now has prompted the second highest religious authority in Shiism, Ayatollah Shirazi, to issue a fatwa 2 days ago declaring anyone who calls for the killing of the religious leaders to be immediately considered a lawful combatant. And this fatwa authorizes any Muslim to act on this decree and neutralize the threat, whoever threatens the life of the religious leaders in Iran. So this is, I think, like kind of shots fired, to the, over the bow of the ship, just telling the Americans that if you dare try to now assassinate religious leaders in Iran, some Iranian or Shia diaspora somewhere is going to take the revenge without having to go back to, as the fatwa said, to go back to any religious leader to authorize them to take that lone, basically, action. And I think this decree covers even the propagandists that are calling for the killing of the Ayatollah in Iran.
Wow. Now, I want to continue on the subject of the war. And since we're talking about the state of the resistance in West Asia, all the focus, Laith, when Iran retaliated for this circus exhibition, this strike on its nuclear facilities by the U.S. bombers. And we can get into why I say that's a circus if you want to, but that's not what my question's about. All of the focus was on the retaliation on the Al Udeid massive U.S. military base in Qatar. But there were also, I saw at that moment in the sort of the fog of war, there were some reports coming out that U.S. military bases in Iraq were also coming under attack, and they just kind of disappeared. So it's very unclear to me. I would have thought that the resistance groups in Iraq would very likely engage in some action against the illegal, occupation military bases in their country, in solidarity with Iran if the U.S. attacked. Do we know anything about that? Were any U.S. military bases in Iraq attacked at the same time? And if so, do we know what was accomplished in those attacks?
Well, the Iranians, let's make it clear for our viewers, called the Qataris and the Americans and said, hey, the Trump just farted, and we know if we humiliate you fully right now, you're going to be cornered and you're going to have no choice but to fire a nuke, because that's what will be left if America's all bases, if Iran just bombed the hell out of all American bases without a warning and killed hundreds of or tens of thousands of American soldiers and destroyed the economies of the Gulf vassals. What would happen? America would have no choice but to throw a nuke. So like, get all your stuff out and get ready for it's going to come on this hour. Show us your best trying to stop this attack. Okay. And they fired exactly 16 missiles, the same number of missiles that the U.S. fired on the Iranian facilities, nuclear facilities, on Al Udeid. Al Udeid had all the air defenses that you can think about, and the Qataris engaged their own air defenses and risked their own aviation and fighter jets to try to stop these missiles. And 12 out of the missiles were basically the distraction, and the 4 hit their targets, destroying the main storage areas for weapons and the main fuel storage areas, because all the jets, of course, have already taken off as the U.S. withdrew them all to Greece and Cyprus. This was a slap, really well done. It shook the whole Qatar itself, this whole fabricated glass country in the middle of the desert, was shaken by these 4 missiles. In terms of the reported attacks in Iraq, the Iranians deny that they attacked anything in Iraq. They said, we did one thing, we told the Americans we're going to do it, we dared them to try to stop it, and they couldn't stop it. We just wanted to show them what could have been if they were stupid enough and had actually succeeded in hitting nuclear sites and leading to nuclear fallout with mass deaths and mass poisoning of waters and lands. What would have happened with Iran's response? But when I was in Iraq, and I just came back, I went last week, it was clear that the three major American bases in the country, Ain al-Assad and near Al Tanaf area and near the Erbil area, were all hit. There was missiles. Nobody claims who fired them. There was missiles and drones, and there was damage. And so that was most probably also just a show of force by the Iraqi resistance. And the Iranians purposefully also didn't inform anybody about it and didn't claim it to be part of it, to also tell the Americans, we also can play this game of negotiating with you and firing at you at the same time, as the Americans did over and over.
Right. So I guess the big question, well, there are two or three big questions I want to address with you before we close it out. In the final hours of this, well, it's not over, I think, by a long shot, but the war, the 12-day war, as they call it, some of us were debating whether Iran should agree to a ceasefire. And I took the position myself in a couple of discussions on Reason to Resist that Israel was on the ropes and that there was an extraordinary opportunity to deliver such a blow that it would be deterred from ever attacking Iran again in any way, shape, or form. Not that I wanted to see war and death, but the reality is that Western governments are going to back the genocidal entity no matter what it does. In fact, I think it does precisely what they wanted to do. It is the tool through which they impose their brutal, sadistic will on the peoples of the region. And given that that's the reality, the only thing that's going to actually put a stop to this is military force. So that was my view at the time. We'll find out whether, that view is correct. I'm curious to know what your view is, Laith. Do you think that Iran should have agreed to this ceasefire? And if you think so, well, whatever your view may be, why do you hold that view?
Well, Iran agreed to a ceasefire with the United States. Israel, as the United States bitch, stopped when Trump pulled its leash. That's basically it. Iran knows that there's a second round and more than that coming. Look, in the beginning of this war, October 7th, 2023, in the Al-Aqsa flood, people didn't understand why the axis of resistance didn't come to immediately jump into the battleground, and Hezbollah could have probably reached Haifa in 24 hours if it did. That's if we forget that there was already the pagers that have already been laced with explosives handed to Hezbollah prior to the war, and the mass deaths that could have led to of Hezbollah fighters. But let's imagine that those pagers didn't exist. The West sent the largest armada of ships in recorded modern history to the shores of Lebanon and Palestine without Hezbollah entering the war. Could you imagine if Lebanon, Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Yemen all attacked at the same time, what the West would have done at that moment? I think they would have nuked everybody. Israel would have nuked everybody. So those who designed Al-Aqsa flood, the martyrs, Yahya Sinwar and Al-Daif, knew that this is going to have to be played for a long time to allow the internal cohesion of the whole Western Empire and its reason of existence to be exposed to the rest of the world, this empire of death, and this Zionism to be totally laid bare in front of all our eyes. What does Zionism mean? That the Palestinian doesn't have to anymore explain what Zionism means and its history. Okay. And that there will be huge losses in martyrs, huge numbers of victims, including the leaders of the resistance that are probably not going to see the end of Liberation Day of Palestine. And so we have seen these phases as going through, and now it got to a point where the whole of human consciousness has been saturated with the crimes of Zionism and colonialism and imperialism, okay, to the point where there's nobody that can deny what's happening, where somebody on a stage will scream, death, death to the IDF. This is how much saturation we are. And the stresses economically on the West to maintain this Zionist colony, the stresses on the soft power of the West, the internal cohesion of these societies that is now on the edge of total rebellion with the picking up of arms, as has happened in the United States with Elias Rodriguez, and or with the advanced militancy of Palestine Action, that if prescribed as terrorists in the British Parliament, will for sure mean armed militancy will arrive in the shores of the UK against Zionism. Okay, all of those are why Iran has to, and the axis of resistance have to drag this as long as they can. Although Iran could have wiped Israel off the map with 10 or 20,000 missiles all at once and be gone like piff poff, okay, and the American bases. But nobody wants the nuclear holocaust, and we as the people of this region don't want to be the cause that everybody remembers as the reason that nuclear winter descended on humans is because those Arabs and Muslims didn't want to submit.
Understood. So my last question to you, Laith, I'm going to ask you to pull out your crystal ball and give it a good polish and tell us what you think lies ahead. So I think you and I agree that the America's rabid Israeli dog is not going to stop. This is just a pause in the war between Iran and Israel, with the United States and the whole of the West on the side of Israel. I mean, it's really a war between the West and Israel, and Iran, I should say. Let's be clear about that. It's not the pipsqueak Israel would have no hope of ever putting up any kind of a fight against Iran, a much larger, formidable country with an ancient, distinguished history, were it not for the full backing of the West. So this is really a war between the West and Iran, and we know that the West isn't going to stop. How do you see this playing out in the months ahead? Do you think they're just
beginning to? Sorry, go ahead.
Do you think they're going to do or attempt to do? Because they've been saying this. The Israelis have been saying they're going to treat this ceasefire like the one in Lebanon. So basically, Iran stops attacking them, and they just attack Iran whenever they feel like it. Do you think that's what's going to happen? That they're going to revert to overt military attack on Iran, or do you see this playing out in some other way?
They're now barking more than ever. This is, of course, imaginary that they can do what they're doing in Lebanon and Iran. And by the way, we're already seeing the beginnings of the next stages of this war. In the last 12 hours, there's been, tens of Azerbaijanis arrested in Iran, and tens of Azerbaijanis arrested in Russia. Okay, and then there was tens of Russians arrested in Azerbaijan, and a invasion of Sputnik Azerbaijan, and the arrest of all the staff of Sputnik Radio, the Russian radio, in Azerbaijan. And so why I'm saying this is because Azerbaijan, by the way, a lot of the flights attacking the central north part of Iran were coming through Azerbaijani airspace over the Caspian Sea and firing towards Tehran. So the Azerbaijani were military and intelligence services were heavily involved in the war against Iran, and we're seeing the results beginning now. The payback starts, and we will see the Israelis, because the United States cannot attack Iran and will not attack Iran. It's not going to do it. The Israelis have to now prove that they are the bully again. Okay, they've just got been slapped on their behind in front of the whole world. They need to stand up and slam somebody to get back their, putting fear into the Arabs. Okay, and by the way, Netanyahu just said today that Arab nationalism is no more a threat to Israel. It's now Persian nationalism, and we can say rest in peace to Jamal Abdel Nasser, the founder of Arab unificationist thought, to the Ba'ath Party, to every Arabic republic that attempted to unify, those flags of Syria and Iraq and Yemen all being the same color, and the unification with Egypt. And this is what happens now. You have a Wahhabi death squad in Damascus that's allowed to mass rape and mass kill as long as they sign a Abraham Accord, and they just got the lifting of sanctions of Syria just hours ago, by the way. The Israelis will attempt to either attack Yemen again in the next few days, and most probably will reignite the war in Lebanon. But this is going to take a little bit more setting up, and this, as we have seen, will require the mass involvement of Wahhabi death squads at invasion from Syria, because the diaper army cannot face the Lebanese resistance. They need to send head choppers in the hundreds of thousands to even face the brave Lebanese resistance that faced those hordes for a long time anyways in Syria and kept them at bay.
Yeah. And I'll just add one little thought. If people think Hezbollah has been defeated, ask yourselves this: why hasn't the Israeli military moved into South Lebanon up to the Litani River? It's long coveted this land, and it's not even attempting to occupy South Lebanon because it knows full well that it continues to confront a fierce and serious enemy there in the form of the resistance, not just Hezbollah, but other Lebanese resistance fighters. In any case, Laith, I know it's getting late there, late there, not Laith, but late in Beirut, and I really appreciate you taking the time in the evening there to join us this evening. I look forward to our next discussion.
Great to see you, man. Talk to you soon.
And we're signing off for now on Reason to Resist, and hopefully we'll be able to come back to you with a live stream on Thursday of this week. Peace out.